Hello everyone, I'm François Picard. Here in France, the mad scramble's only just begun after Emmanuel Macron's surprise dissolution of Parliament Sunday and a late-night deal in principle for the left to agree to joint candidacies for the first round of legislative elections due to take place in just 19 days' time. Now comes the leader of the conservative Les Républicains party tearing apart his formation. Eric Ciotti, who's running for re-election in Nice, where the far-right surged in EU elections last Sunday, says he's favorable to a deal with Marine Le Pen's national rally. Solange Mougin has more.
It is a push that's created shockwaves among French conservatives. The president of the Republicans says he's in favor of an alliance with the far-right's national rally.
I needed to build an alliance based on right-wing values. I'm staying true to myself. I'm right-wing. I remain right-wing. I'm a Republican. I'm at the head of my political family. I'm proposing an alliance with people who are French, and I will never stigmatize them.
Yet Ciotti's stance breaks with decades of a united front against the far right. For years, French political parties, be they on the right, the centre or the left, have at times joined forces to combat the far right. Ciotti's stance breaks with that. And for many in his party, aligning with the national rally is inadmissible. The head of the Senate, Gérard Larcher, called for Ciotti to step down on social media. Others also voiced their discontent.
Pierre Mendès France once said, "Never sacrifice the future for the president."
Prior to the announcement, another leader of the party said that those in favor of aligning with the far right should leave their political group.
The DNA of the Republican right is never extremism. Never extremism. Never the National Front, never Marine Le Pen, and still, if some want to go that route, let them say that and go now.
Well, on the left, France's major parties have come to an agreement. On the right, the differences are not only showing, they're creating deep divides.
Our coverage begins in central Paris with France 24's Clovis Casali. Clovis, tell us where you are.
Well, just outside the headquarters of the party, Les Républicains, seen for a long time as centre-right, possibly right-wing, and now leaning more than ever to the far right, with Eric Ciotti, the boss of the party, and his shock announcement today saying he wants an alliance with the far-right party of Marine Le Pen, the National Rally. He's got his reasons, he says. He says Les Républicains have had disappointing results in the past, 7%, barely around 7% in the last EU elections. Therefore, in order to be able to govern the country, Les Républicains need to make this deal with the national rally of Marine Le Pen. It really has been a soap opera today, with party heavyweights here criticising his decision, saying he's no longer legitimate to be the leader of the party. Also telling us one party heavyweight, former minister and former Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier, telling us there had been no talks about this before. None of these party heavyweights had been consulted by Eric Ciotti before he made, alone, according to them, this decision to join forces, if you will, with Marine Le Pen and the far right.
And we have a situation where I saw earlier the head of Marine Le Pen's party saying he wants as broad a possible coalition, but that seems to be shifting slightly.
Marine Le Pen has always said we need to change the party's image. We need to attract figures from the right, from the mainstream parties like Les Républicains. And that's more or less what she's achieved today. At the same time, she doesn't want to attract everyone on the right because her party has just decided not to conclude a deal with Reconquête. Reconquête is the other big party from the far right. Big party. They got a bit over 5% of the votes in the EU elections. It's the party of Eric Zemmour. But Eric Zemmour is not a friend of Marine Le Pen. She doesn't want to have anything to do with him, even though Eric Zemmour is with Marion Maréchal in his party Reconquête. Marion Maréchal is the niece of Marine Le Pen. So a few tensions there. And Marion Maréchal today tweeting that she was extremely disappointed that her former party, the National Rally, didn't want to have anything to do with Reconquête. So tensions on the far right there. But Marine Le Pen is convinced she will anyway get MPs ahead of Reconquête. She's convinced that the Reconquête voters will choose her candidates in the legislative elections coming up very soon.
Yeah, it's a family affair. Let's listen to Marion Maréchal Le Pen.
Jordan Bardella informed me this afternoon of a change of position and the National Rally's refusal of the very principle of an agreement.
That's the tweet you were referring to there. So still plenty of moving waters, Clovis Casali, when it comes to which alliances, which deals will be concluded. The deadline for candidacies is this coming Friday. Many thanks for that live update, Clovis, from outside of the headquarters of the conservative Les Républicains party. We mentioned the left trying to get its ducks in order. The outgoing parliament, just to remind our viewers, it was 1/3 centrists of Emmanuel Macron, 1/3 the far right of Marine Le Pen, which had 89 seats, and 1/3 for the left. With us is France 24's Claire Paccalin. We've talked about the far right. We've talked about the conservatives. We've talked about the left. What about Macron's party?
Well, Macron's party right now are having a meeting at the Renaissance HQ, their headquarters in Paris. And we know that Gabriel Attal, so his prime minister, will be speaking on television at 8 p.m. tonight. So we'll be following that. And Macron will be speaking tomorrow. So we're going to get a bit more of an idea of their game plan in the next few hours very soon. But really what I understand for now is that there's a reassurance that needs to happen, because members of Macron's party, Renaissance, as well as members of parliament who belong to that party, were shocked, surprised about this announcement. They were not expecting it, and now they're having to campaign to keep their jobs. We know even in the inner circle of Macron, they were only not long at all before the announcement was made, told that this was going to happen, and many of them felt that it could be perilous. So there's a real effort now to try to reassure the party and tell them onwards and upwards. We need to be defiant, put on a brave face, and fight in this campaign. On
the agenda, a press conference on Wednesday by the president. He's going to be front and center in this campaign. Is it going to be all about Macron the next 19 days? Well, Macron's clearly the boss. He's the risk taker in all of this. We know he's a risk taker. He always has been. That's part of his nature. Giving you a bit of context, Emmanuel Macron's party doesn't actually have an absolute majority in the national parliament at the moment. It lost that 2 years ago in the last parliamentary election. So it's not like he's throwing that away by calling these snap elections. And he has 3 years left of his presidency. He can't run for a third time. By the constitution, that's not allowed. So he's rolled the dice. Now, to an extent, of course, this campaign will be about him. He's the president, but he's got his prime minister, who has reasonably good popularity ratings in France, Gabriel Attal. And of course, all of these MPs will be fighting for their jobs again. And I've spoken to some of those MPs, and they told me, we're going to be out in the markets, on the streets, until June 30th. And after that, of course, in the second round, July 7th, speaking to French people, telling them why we think that the far right's policies are incoherent, why we think that the far right's policies will weaken France on a societal and an economic level. So that's their job
We
now.
had, Claire, a member of parliament from Macron's party on set here last night. She was completely caught off guard Sunday night. She was not in the know. There is this sense that everything is coming from the top.
Well, I was in the room at Valérie Hérie's campaign electoral evening on Sunday evening when we all found out the results. Valérie Hérie was, of course, Macron's candidate in the European election. She was running the list for Renaissance, his party. She was at that campaign headquarters. We were all watching the television. We first got the results for the European elections. Not so good for Valérie Hérie and Emmanuel Macron. But then after that, the surprise announcement from Emmanuel Macron. We knew that he was going to speak. We'd found that out earlier in the evening. So we thought something big might be happening, because it's rare, it was very unusual for the president to speak on the night of the European elections. So we thought he might say something. There were people gasping out loud in the room. No one was expecting it. And of course, many of them do think it could be perilous. But they're putting on a brave face, acting defiant, saying, onwards and upwards, we're going to fight this campaign because we really think that we need to do this for France and for French people.
Claire Paccalin, many thanks. With us, Andrew Knapp, Professor Emeritus of French Politics at the University of Reading. Thank you for being with us. You just heard Claire Paccalin there, a leader who's a risk taker and decides he's going to take on a nativist movement by going back before the voters. Doesn't that sound like David Cameron in 2016?
It does indeed. Can I just add one thing before we turn over to Big Dave? There was also, I think, for Macron, the prospect of a successful vote of no confidence in the National Assembly coming at him this autumn.
For the budget?
For the budget, because the moderate right are very worried about the deficit. And it could be that part of the equation for him was actually reckoning it's going to happen anyway.
I better choose the time. It's better that I am calling the shots.
Exactly.
Absolutely. That could have been.
So is this the same kind of risk-taking that David Cameron took?
Well, they resemble each other a little bit. I think, they're both posh boys who haven't much experience of real life, who came to the top job a bit too young, and who think of all it as a little bit of a game, I think. And that for a lot of people is potentially rather worrying. Because, of course, for David Cameron, it really did blow up in his face, and he walked away. I don't think Macron is going to walk away from his presidential term.
So Andrew Knapp...
He's ruled that out, we heard earlier on today. Whatever the result, he said he would not step down. Yeah. He wants to go for the last 3 years. That's what he's saying.
And he's got the tools at his disposal. There's precedents of presidents in power-sharing agreements, what we call here in France cohabitation.
Yes. And of course, France has gone through cohabitation 3 times before, in 86-88, in 93-95, and then the longest period, 97-2002. Not since then, because the previous times were more or less the product of the 7-year presidential term and the 5-year parliamentary term being out of sync. They are no longer out of sync. The presidential term has been reduced to 5 years. And so until Sunday, they went in lockstep, and the president had, if not an absolute majority, at any rate, the largest group in Parliament. So this changes all that, and there is not a little prospect of cohabitation between Macron and a far-right majority in the National Assembly. And if that happens, I think it would be the roughest cohabitation yet. Why? Because at least the 3 previous times, France had had more or less a consensus on foreign and defence policy. There is no consensus.
Which remained in oftentimes the remit of the president, even when he wasn't the one calling the shots in Parliament.
Mostly, not 100%.
Not 100%, but
if you look at the Constitution...
This time it'll be different, you're saying?
Well, if you look at the Constitution, the President is the Commander-in-Chief, but the government has at its disposal the armed forces. The government, the parliamentary majority, has the purse strings. So the President cannot do absolutely as he likes in foreign and defence policy.
This is a constitution written by General de Gaulle, where he goes to the people regularly. That's what Emmanuel Macron has done. When you look at the news cycle of the last 12 hours and how the party that claims to be the descendant of Gaullism, the Les Républicains, is tearing itself apart, who holds the mantle? Who's got de Gaulle in his DNA between Macron and the Républicains?
How the mighty are fallen.
Yeah.
How the mighty are fallen. Yes. Gosh, who's the best? I mean, clearly, if you look at the...
Is Gaullism dead?
It's a set of attitudes. He's a picture on the wall. His memoirs in the official portrait of Macron that's up on the walls of official buildings, de Gaulle's memoirs are there on the table next to Macron's hand. So he's a mythical figure, but a lot of
its lip service.
I think it's very hard now to translate the options that de Gaulle incarnated into present-day political choices. But Macron clearly, anyone who steps into those shoes is going to compare himself to de Gaulle. N'est pas de Gaulle qui veut. In fact, you can't be de Gaulle just by wanting it.
Andrew Knapp, you have in front of you Claire Paccalin, who's just back from covering the D-Day commemorations. I know you've written about how the French view D-Day, and you've written about specific portions of the history of what happened in France during the war. The young people today who are voting far right, do they see a problem with Marine Le Pen's, we talked about DNA, what her political DNA is?
Yes, I mean, one has to remember that this is a party founded in 1972 by Marine Le Pen's father, who's on record as describing the Holocaust as a detail of World War II and making some very nasty jokes about gas ovens. And the co-founder was actually a member of the Waffen-SS. He volunteered to fight.
So is all that history?
I think for young voters, all that is history, yes. And to be fair, Marine Le Pen did chuck her father out of the party and has undertaken a major effort to de-demonize the party. How much you actually think the party has really, really changed underneath all that?
So give us clues. Which direction does it point to? Does it still have the collaborationist regime of Pétain in its DNA?
I think that's seen as an irrelevance for the great majority of its voters. There will certainly be some people at the heart of the party who respond to the collaborationist regime's values of travail, famille, patrie, which are
work,
which are
family,
and fatherland, which are explicitly framed as an alternative, as a negation of liberté, égalité, fraternité. So I think there are certainly people in a lot of people in the Rassemblement National who prefer travail, famille, patrie to liberté, égalité, fraternité. And I think that of the full Republican triptych, the Rassemblement National is shortest on fraternité between peoples, and particularly fraternity towards the immigrant population. And of course, one of the things that the Vichy regime, the collaborationist regime, did was separate the population into categories of good French and bad French, and the bad French were the Jews. Now, anti-Semitism has pretty much disappeared from the showcase of the Rassemblement National. Indeed, I believe it is the case that Jews voted slightly more for the Rassemblement National than the average. It's certainly a much more acceptable party than when it was under Jean-Marie Le Pen.
So these young people who vote far right, why do they do it?
A sense of having missed out, having a sense of national decline, a sense of their generation probably not having it so good as the previous generation. This is not, of course, a uniquely French phenomenon. And possibly also a sense of the immigrant population, the Muslim population in particular, offering them unfair competition in the market for decent jobs, decent housing.
It's a 19-day sprint now to those that first round.
Shortest parliamentary election campaign in recent French history, yes.
All right, and it seems like those D-Day commemorations of last Thursday were 1,000,000 years ago. Claire Paccalin, many thanks for being with us. Thanks as well to Andrew Knapp for joining us here on set.
Pleasure.